Alan Stratton from Aswood Turns. Recently, Jari Hirvonen from Finland asked how to make wooden buttons. Wanted to make them uniform so that they look similar. Didn't want one-offs. So I checked the AW website for some resources. Found the key there was to make the holes uniform in the blank and then to have a better chance at turning them uniform afterwards. So let's make some uniform wooden buttons, but be sure to allow a few extras in case there's a catch.
For this set of buttons, I did not like the prospect of marking out all those tiny holes and getting them exactly in the right place. So I made a drilling jig. I'll explain the jig in another video. First, I'll drill the same set of holes in 2 scrap blocks that are the same size as my button blanks. These I'll use later in the process to size and align the buttons. These 2 scrap blocks will have the same center holes that will align them later to the lathe chuck, but are useful now to align and center the jig to the drill press. The center of the jig becomes the center of the button. I'd recommend making the button blanks somewhat oversized to the final target size. The jig uses spacers whose widths are 1/2 the distance between the button holes. 2 spacers are used on each side of the jig. The center hole on just these 2 scrap blocks uses 1 spacer on each side of the jig. The real button blanks will use combinations of none and 2 spacers on each side to position the 4 holes. I position the blank in spacers and lock down the blank, drill the hole, change the spacer configuration, drill another hole until the 4 holes are all done. Even with the jig and a waste strip to drill into, this paduk was very brittle. There was an uncomfortable amount of tear out and chipping on both the top and the bottom of the button blanks. Next time I may try veneer tape on both sides of the blank to try to reduce the chip out. Now to the lathe. I made small threaded wood faceplates for both the headstock spindle and tailstock live center. Please see my faceplate video for details on making wood faceplates. The tailstock faceplate can also be held by a chuck. Here's where the scrap blocks from the drilling operation come into play. I drilled a center hole in each faceplate and used a drill bit to align this hole to the center hole in the scrap block for both the headstock faceplate and the tailstock faceplate. Then glued the waste blocks to the faceplate. If all goes well, all the holes can be aligned. I stacked up all my blanks on 2 pieces of brass rod in diagonally opposite holes and mounted the stack between the 2 faceplates. By the way, I used Baltic birch for these faceplates, but would use solid wood next time. At this small diameter, the Baltic birch tended to crack at the lamination joints. Then to turn the buttons uniformly round. I started with a gouge. I tried the gouge also in shear scraping mode, but again the brittle paduk chipped out in the short side grain. I switched to a skew to try for a cleaner cut until I remembered that this is a cross grain turning and a skew would be dangerous to either me or the wood. Finally I switched to using scrapers, a round nose scraper and my skew used as a scraper. Ultimately I put some pressure sensitive 80 grit sandpaper on a small piece of plywood for the final sand to get them even. I tested the diameter with calipers. They are close, but there's still a little taper across the entire stack. I figured these were close enough. Now for the button faces. I used another wood faceplate with a fresh piece of pine glued on. I turned a recess in the pine to use as a jam chuck. It turns out that the button I used to size the recess came from the larger end of the stack. I needed a layer of paper towel in the hole about 1/2 of the blanks. I turned both faces on each button before moving on to the next one. I kept the first button on the lathe headstock to use as a pattern and flipped it over for the button face and the back. I used the round nose scraper and my small skew as scrapers. At times I tipped the scraper up on its corner to reduce the contact area, especially over the thread holes in the buttons. This was the area most at risk for more chip out. I sanded each face and or back from 180 grit up through 600 grit, also using a mineral oil and beeswax mixture for both a sanding media and the final finish. To remove the button, I had remembered, fortunately, to drill a hole through the faceplate, so I could use the knockout bar to press out the button from the recess. With all the button fronts and backs finished, I again used the wood faceplate I had previously used to size the button. I reduced the diameter of the faceplate to less than the button, so I could have enough room to radius the backside without flipping the button over. This time I cut 2 short pieces of brass rod and inserted these into the headstock faceplate. These were just long enough to hold one button. For the tailstock live center, I drilled out a rubber stopper to cushion the button and the tailstock. I kept the tailstock in place while using a tool and at least through the more coarse grits of sandpaper. Then, if I was careful to maintain pressure from the front, I could finish sand without the tailstock. I did have a catch on one button, which cracked the button. All the more reason to start with more blanks than final buttons. Then also with a selection, you can choose those that most closely match or have the best grain pattern for the final coat or jacket they are intended for. The beeswax and mineral oil made a nice finish on these buttons. Hopefully the wood you select will not be as brittle as this paduk. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel so I can let you know when the next wood turning video is ready. Please add your comments and project suggestions. Until next time, I'm Alan Stratton from As Wood Turns.